Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining this session today. I'm going to spend about half an hour talking about some of the trends that we see in publishing on a worldwide basis, and then we'll have time to take some questions. So what we're going to do, where are we now in publishing, looking at what's happened with COVID and where we are in the kind of aftermath of COVID. First, a very quick word about FIPP. For those of you who don't know who we are, let me just move my thing out of the way. There we go. So FIPP is one of the world's largest media membership associations. We help you to learn. We share examples of learning from across the world, and we help you to network. Here are some of the companies that we have in our network, and although we have a very large global membership, the network of companies that we work with is bigger than this. And this presentation really is designed to reflect their knowledge and is a genuinely global picture of the industry, we hope. And there are some of the names there that you're going to hear from today. So I want to start, first of all, just by thinking about how people and humans think about and deal with change. This graphic is taken from a fantastic website called waitbutwhy.com, who publish very occasionally but very good stuff when they do publish. And basically what this tells you is that humans are pretty bad at predicting the impact of change on humanity. We tend to underestimate when we're sat there in the blue blob in the present day. We look back at the past and we think that the trajectory of past growth is an indicator for the future. And so we underestimate the extent to which change is going to happen in the future. And actually, when we think about the situation we're in right now, this is instinctively true. Change is happening at a more accelerating rate, and I'll show you a little bit more about how much that acceleration is happening in a moment. But also, change is not a linear process. Change does not happen in straight lines. Change happens in S-curves. So as a technology comes onto the market, it's slowly adopted at first, and then suddenly it has mass adoption, then growth tails off as the market becomes saturated. And you think about a good example of that is the smartphone. When smartphones first came onto the market, very few people had them because they were expensive. Then suddenly everybody started buying them, and now everybody's got a smartphone, and some people have got two or three. Now, what you see at the moment is that coronavirus has accelerated a great many trends. So you can expect to see the S-curves taking less time to reach saturation and are grouped more closely together. In other words, technologies and changes coming onto the market more closely and more quickly than before. And a very obvious example of that is the thing we're using right now. Zoom. Video conferencing was something that people used occasionally and had used occasionally for many, many years, and has now become, in a very short space of time, ubiquitous. Everybody uses it, and it's become saturated in the market to the point that people are sick of it. So the S-curve for video conferencing has gone from the beginning to the end almost in 3 years, a very short space of time. Now, technology and digital technology is not the only kind of key disruption that society has faced over the last 100 years. So change is not a new phenomenon, and it's not limited to the digital space. Over the last 120 years, there have been lots of examples of change, starting at this graph showing technology proliferation and showing those S-curves in the sense of their adoption rate of various technologies over time. Look on the left-hand end, you've got grid electricity, mains electricity, ending with the current S-curve of smartphones and social media on the right-hand side. They don't all follow exactly the same pattern. We have a tendency also to sit and think that we as a generation, we as our time, is the most important time and the most revolutionary time in human history. That's not necessarily the case. If you look at something like shipping containers that sit there in the middle of the graph in the 1960s, the grey line, there was a much more rapid adoption of shipping containers than any modern digital technology, and they changed the world much more rapidly than social media or the internet have done. The reason you can buy the computer that you're watching this presentation on for $500 instead of $5,000 is because it came in a standardized shipping container and not in a box that was loaded onto a ship in a net, as the way things used to be done. So the question for us as media executives, though, is what's next? What's the next curve off the right-hand end of the graph? How can we avoid false curves that don't end up with mass adoption? And when we do identify a curve that is going to take off, like the smartphone or social media, how can we take advantage of that? And you could argue that as an industry, we've been pretty poor at identifying and taking advantage of S-curves as they happen. And just finally, to show that the rate of change in society is increasing. This is the number of years it took for each of these different products to gain 50 million users. So from the first commercial passenger on an airline to the 50 millionth commercial passenger took 68 years. For Pokemon, it took 19 days when they launched Pokemon Go. For Twitter, 2 years. For Facebook, 3 years. So a good example at the moment as well is Zoom. If you look at the share price of Zoom, that has gone from nothing to a very, very large number in a very short space of time because of the mass adoption of that technology. So the rate of change is increasing. The impact that that change can have on society is profound. And for us as a media executive, it's about trying to identify which one of those is going to affect our consumers and our industry and doing something about it. And of course, overlaid on this is the general situation in which we find ourselves as an industry. Brutally, the magazine industry, the print magazine industry, used to be a pretty easy industry to work in, if we're honest. Here is Time magazine. This is their Man of the Year issue from 2000 with George W. Bush, then president. And this probably represents the peak, the high watermark of the print industry as it was then. It's never been as good as it was since then. We can call this approach, the approach that we had, the approach that we still have if we're in print, Christmas in July. Christmas in July means that the lead times in our content are so long that we have to do our Christmas shoots in July. So we've all had that slightly bizarre experience of going to the studio and shooting turkeys and Christmas decorations in July, because that's the amount of time you need to get the thing onto the page. The fundamental model, though, was the same for both B2C and B2B magazine companies, slightly shorter lead time for the weekly titles. And the basic model was that we focused mainly on creating content and on selling ads, and we tried not to think too hard about the very inefficient supply chains we had to interact with for everything else. We'd crank the handle every week and every month, and this is a slightly facetious way to present the industry, because ultimately, most of the time, we would get a fantastic result. And the reason we did it this way was because it worked. We made great content, award-winning content, read by millions of people, a majority of the population, and we made a lot of money. So whilst it may seem anachronistic now in the digital world that we live in, it wasn't wrong in the time that we were living in then to have this model. But of course, the model changed. And I'll come on to the impact of that change in a minute. But here's an example first of how well it worked. These are Meredith's financial results from the year 2000. If you look at the numbers, in 2000, they turned over $1 billion and they made a 25% EBITDA, 25% profit margin. And the margin was getting better year on year. And in those days, Meredith was primarily a print and a locally focused linear TV business, but mainly print. So a fantastically profitable business with fantastic margins and growing. A great position to be in. But then, of course, in the early part of this century, as we all know, things started to change. There were signs there in the early 2000s, mainly a slow, gradual decline in print circulation, but it was the financial crisis in 08-09 that really triggered the sharpest decline in circulation and advertising, which we never got back. And of course, the key underlying factor was the rise of digital media, which is why we're all here today. Just look at the revenue picture that resulted. I won't spend too much time on this because you know this already. Newspaper advertising revenue adjusted for inflation, the pinky purple line. Basically, we lost all of the gains since 1960 in 10 years. In the circulation space, these are circulations of UK newspapers in roughly the same period. Again, all trending in the same direction. And this would be the same for newspapers or magazines in any market pretty much that you care to pick under the sun. So a pretty gloomy picture. And it's important also to think about the rapid change in the framework of the industry that's taken place over the last 20 years. So if we plot the fundamental dynamics of the industry on a graph, what are the three key axes? Well, I would argue that they are the content or the service type that we're offering, they are the monetization model, and they're the medium or the platform. And if you think about the change in each one of these, in the last 20 years, we've seen a vast explosion of content types. In other words, being able to produce content types that we couldn't produce before through the democratization of the content production tools. In monetization, the last 20 years have seen the looming end of the advertising-based business model. If you're still out there thinking advertising is going to come back, it ain't going to come back. So don't think that that's the solution to the future. Advertising as a business is never going to be as important as it was. Still going to be important, but not as important as it was. And in the last 20 years, we've seen the addition of two critical new platforms that you have to get right. So if you think about the content or the service type, of course, we have text and images. Some of us then started doing video and audio, getting into data businesses and live events. In the monetization side, the indirect model of advertising is now being supplanted by the D2C, direct-to-consumer model. And then in the medium or the platform, of course, many of us have our origins in print. Some of us may have worked in radio or television. We then had in-person or live events, and of course now desktop, mobile, and social. So what does this mean overall? The rapid change in the industry has meant that the industry has become enormously more complex than it was before. There are so many different intersections of all of these different points on these axes that you almost have too much opportunity. You don't know what to do next. But crucially, with this complexity comes opportunity, the opportunity to reach more consumers and add more revenue streams. So this change that we've been through in the industry has created enormous challenges, but it does bring enormous opportunities. And my absolute key message to everybody at the moment that we're speaking to is that our focus as an industry needs to be on seizing those opportunities, not trying to hold back the challenges. Too many companies for too long have spent their time thinking about how they can hold back the challenge to their core business, to their legacy business, instead of focusing on the opportunities that are ahead of them. If you do that, you're not going to succeed. And what we really want to do here is build a business that's going to work for the next 150 years on the basis of the business that we built that worked for the last 150 years. And to do that, the crucial message to survive this crisis, to survive future crises and thrive, is that you must have multiple revenue streams, and some of these have to be digital revenue streams. If you rely on only one source of revenue, then your business is at risk. Before I get into the framework of how we think about the business, just very briefly on what's happened at the time of coronavirus. I won't go into this in too much detail because you're all living in this, you know this stuff, but just to remind you of where we are, if you think about the things that have done less well in this time, print circulation, I'm talking about newsstand circulation, print advertising, and live events. Now, live events is a little bit of a special case, an exception. That's purely a reaction to the pandemic that will come back, starting to come back now. But print circulation and print advertising, this has just driven the underlying trend that was already there and pushed it more quickly towards its inevitable conclusion. In print circulation, there are a lot of companies. In fact, immediately before this session, I was talking to a magazine company, which shall remain nameless, who have given up on the newsstand. They said, we're not going to bother with the newsstand anymore. It's too wasteful, too inefficient, and coronavirus has just pushed us to the point where we just think there's no point. So print circulation at the newsstand, not a great place, and print advertising for the massive volumes that we had in the past have gone and are never going to come back. Digital advertising probably netted out to zero. There was a lot of loss in the early part of COVID, came back in the second half. But then there are 4 areas that have really done very well. Print subscriptions. So a lot of businesses now refocusing on their print subscription business because it's done so well in COVID, because there are signs there that people want it. Web traffic, building an audience that you can monetize. E-commerce and digital subscriptions, 2 crucial areas where the numbers have gone up, in some cases triple-digit percentage growth in these businesses. Now, I won't go into this in too much detail. You can read in the speaker notes afterwards, which will circulate all the kind of data that sits behind this. So that's the kind of broad trends. So what does all this mean in terms of the way in which you should think about your business? This is our suggested business framework for magazine media companies. And there are 4 critical enablers. There's your workplace culture and the people that attracts. There's ensuring that your workplace is diverse and inclusive. There's ensuring that you have the right technology and that you're operating sustainably and you can demonstrate this to your consumers. These are 4 kind of key fundamental get rights that you must have that underpin the whole entirety of the business. Then everything that you do, including your print operations, should be underpinned by a data strategy to ensure that you're directly owning the customer data, that you can put all of that into a single repository where you can own it and analyze it and use it to make decisions about your business. And then most businesses will have 3 fundamental areas of operation. They have print, digital, and what we might call other. All of these then break down into some fundamental business lines. And of these, I would say the digital consumer revenue line is the one that's the most crucial one. It looks like getting this right is going to be the thing that differentiates success from failure in the future. And that really has a number of different aspects to it. But the 2 crucial ones that we'll look at in a bit more detail at the moment are paid content and e-commerce. In advertising, I think the picture is moving towards this native and content studio piece. That seems to be where the most revenue is to be gained and where the most growth is to be gained. at the expense of the traditional display and programmatic models, which frankly are not going to deliver what we want them to deliver in the future. And then in the other element, you've got things like consulting, education, live events, basically businesses that you can spin out of your core business that are not traditional businesses, but which might drive more value for your consumers and thus for your business overall. And all of this at the bottom is done with one eye on merger, acquisition, consolidation, whatever you want to call it. Everything is for sale. Every company in our space is for sale. And when everything is for sale, every decision you make goes to the value of your business, and that becomes a really influential factor in the decisions that you're making. So are you going to invest in a new print business? Probably not, because the return that you get on that when you sell it is half what you would get for investing in a new digital business, and therefore that will drive your decision-making process. So the first critical element that enables future success, I'm not going to go through every bit of the framework in detail because we don't have time to do that. We've only got about another 10, 15 minutes before I'm going to take some questions from you, but I'll just go through them in brief and then you can ask some questions about them. The first critical element is talent and culture, the people you work with and the environment in which you will work. And I would recommend that you go and read this excellent report by Professor Lucy Kung, a good friend of ours and good contributor to FIPP, called Hearts and Minds, Harnessing Leadership, Culture and Talent from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, where she lays out, based on interviews with senior media executives, what the challenges are in this space. And leaving aside diversity, which we'll come on to in a minute, there are 4 key things to consider. The first one is, how do you lead? And in particular, how do you have high thinking and low ego? If I was being slightly cruel and controversial, I might suggest that many in our industry in the leadership positions have had the opposite for a very long time. Now you need to be very kind of hands-off. You need to push power down, be a coach, not a boss. Linked to that is, what is the workplace culture? Does it encourage and enable innovation? Are you displaying those cultural traits yourself as a leader? How do you manage the different workforce, different generations that there are in the workforce? Gen Y and Gen Z operate very differently from baby boomers, who themselves operate very differently from Gen X, and trying to pull together the different demands and requirements of those different generations is key. And then I think the crucial one as well is about how you build the right organization. How do you build the right structure? Crucial in here is hiring people on their mindset rather than necessarily their skills. Are they the right kind of people for your business? Are they prepared to learn and grow? Are they open to new ideas rather than they're the most experienced person in the industry? And crucially, avoiding big bang reorganizations, big top-down digital transformation projects. Get tired of saying it, they do not work, because nobody listens to the CEO. They listen to each other, they listen to their colleagues, they listen to their peers, and it's only by having peer groups that are able to drive the right kind of culture that you're going to be able to deliver transformation. Sorry if there's CEOs out there, but that's the reality of it, unfortunately. Just an example here from trusted media brands, which many of you will know, the old Reader's Digest business in the US just announced a massive investment in video, by the way, just about to pivot a lot of their business towards streaming. Complete transformation for a business that was dying. This is how Bonnie Kintzer, the CEO, presents that transformation. And you can see at the top of the wheel are people and culture, front and center. They couldn't do the rest of it without that. Related to the question of talent and culture is diversity. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, except to say that the Black Lives Matter movement cannot be ignored. It will galvanize, it is galvanizing genuine change across the world. It will change the way we work as much as the coronavirus crisis has done. It's a moral imperative and it's long overdue, but it's also an economic imperative, which is long overdue, because a diverse workplace is one that is open to much greater opportunity. It has more access to talent, ideas, customers, networks. And as we come out of this crisis, we cannot afford to miss this opportunity. We can't afford to turn off any opportunity that exists out there. It's also a critical success factor for your younger workforce, because for them, everything is political. A hamburger is political. There is not a single aspect of any person's business that does not have, for a Gen Y or a Gen Z person, a political dimension. And you as a business owner cannot sit on the fence anymore and have no position on these things. They're expecting that you will have a position. The next key enabler is technology. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, except to say that the key divide is between buy or build. And the key message here is that the software, for most of us, the software as a service solutions that are out there in the cloud are enabling transformation at a very rapid rate. And you need to be rigorous in pursuing the best ones of those for your business and implementing them as quickly as possible. Be agile, be ruthless in getting the right technology, and crucially, don't allow your corporate IT department to hold you back. Your corporate IT department if they're good, will be the best enabler in your business. If they're bad, they will destroy your business very, very quickly. Good example, if you use Microsoft Teams, you've got the wrong corporate IT department, because the Microsoft guy phoned them up at the beginning of COVID and went, well, I can add Teams for an extra $10 per user per year or whatever. And they all went, yeah, okay, then it's not the best solution. So if they're doing that for your internal business communication, they're probably making the same decision for your consumer-facing technology as well. You've got to pick the best solution, not the easiest solution. And SaaS allows you to do that. And then finally, sustainability. Taken a bit of a back foot during the crisis, but with COP26 and then COP27 coming soon as well, it'll come roaring back to prominence. It's a must-have hygiene factor. You have to consider the end-to-end footprint of your operations, including your digital operations. Document the impact that these have and demonstrate to consumers that you understand and you're working to minimize factors like carbon consumption, raw materials usage, particularly plastic, recycling potential, and the human impact, including the ethical policies around having potentially workforces overseas or in the supply chain. Some examples there from UPM and Condé Nast who are doing this very well, but it must be a critical factor. Just very quickly there to show you that digital has potentially more footprint than physical if you don't do it right. This is Bitcoin and how much electricity it uses, which is just a ridiculous amount of waste, basically. And then finally, in terms of the framing elements for this, the data strategy, you've got to have a robust data strategy. It's key. It's a key get right to take advantage of the opportunities that digital presents. Here is the report that we produced recently, The Death of Third-Party Cookies, which is a look at how that's going to affect your online advertising business, but actually also how it's going to affect your direct-to-consumer business. And really, it's only by building the data lake that you can make and develop the successful marketing strategies to build your consumer revenue business, which is where the majority of your focus needs to be in the years ahead. So let's first of all look at the traditional business area for our business, which is print. I'm not going to spend too much time on any of these one areas, particularly because we don't have the time to do that, but just that the key messages here are that one of the key message around print is that print is finding a new place in the media mix. That can be based around strong journalism that's unavailable online. It can be around new packaging for existing content and enhancing the reader value, something that Regina and Steve are very, very good at. You should talk to them about that aspect of your print business, absolutely. And then there is premium print products like Vogue and Elle, where the print is the kind of central to the brand. But I think the key thing here is that print really has a luxury future. And this is what you should be thinking about in your print business. Now, it may seem slightly odd to describe it this way, but I would argue that there is not a print brand out there that can't follow this strategy and make a success of it. This can be summarized overall as deliver more value and charge more for it. The days of us producing magazines printed on toilet paper and charging $1 for them are over, and they're gone forever, thank God. You've got to make magazines that have fantastic production values and are packed with content, and you must charge a fair price for them. A good test or rule of thumb is if your magazine costs less than a good bottle of wine, then it's probably too cheap, because a magazine sure as hell lasts longer than a good bottle of wine does in my house anyway. And there's also a question of ego in here. We have to abandon the idea that a large circulation is a sign of success. Large circulation increasingly is a sign of failure, because that large circulation almost certainly won't be profitable. What we want is profitable circulation. And another crucial message, maybe strange, coming from the guy who runs the Magazine Association, print is not a large industry anymore. It's a medium-sized one. So we've got to think like a medium-sized one, be more reactive, more dynamic, more agile, more responsive to what our consumers want, and they want quality. You can see there the key elements of print's luxury future: lower frequency, so less issues every year, but make each one an event, better production values, more content, much higher cover price. You should be aiming for whatever I'm sorry, I don't have my currency calculator, but whatever 15 euros is in Canadian dollars, that should be your aim. How can I charge that? And focus on subscriptions, if necessary, by completely abandoning the newsstand. So I think a very bright future for print. A number of brands have done this already, and they are, spoke to one today who's just implemented this strategy, and their subscription numbers have gone up, and they've put the price up. And they've increased the quality. So it's absolutely the right strategy to do. Here's a B2B example. Variety have done this very, very well. You can see here that the print basic annual subscription is pretty high. The print plus one a little bit higher, but not that much higher, and that gives you digital as well. And then they have the intelligence platform. And then here is a brand in the UK called the Road Rat, which is a car magazine. 4 times a year they're published, and they charge £48 for a subscription 4 times a year, and they already have more than 10,000 subscribers. So do the math. That's more than £500,000 in circulation revenue, direct delivery, no newsstand involved. Also, print is a trusted medium. You can look at this afterwards. You know this as well. Trust is declining everywhere, but print is the most trusted medium and something that we need to build on as well. So let me move on because we're running out of time. The most critical business trend at the moment is the move away from relying on third parties for your consumer relationship towards developing this direct transactional relationship with your customers. There's a number of ways that you can do this. The 2 biggest ones are paid content. A big one for news brands. Magazine brands have got a lot of work to do here, but there's absolutely no reason why a paid content or a paywall strategy can't work for magazines. And e-commerce, again, a very big opportunity for magazine brands. This content and commerce relationship is one that we must develop. And of course, paid events that we had lots of in the pre-COVID world, and we're going to go back to afterwards. You all know the success story of the New York Times in news. I would argue, as Lucy Kung, who we saw earlier, has argued, Lucy Kung said, the New York Times has done the industry a disservice. They have made the challenge of moving a business from legacy to digital look easy. It is not easy, and not everybody is the New York Times. But if you don't start somewhere, this brand has been doing this for more than 10 years. It takes a long time to get to success, but it is something you have to start. Oops. There are early signs of success in magazines. I'm not going to labor this point too much because the data doesn't really support it yet, but there are some brands that have started going into this space in the magazine world. The data is coming and is very encouraging at the moment. If you look at The Atlantic, has a massive growth in subscriptions, now up past 600,000, I believe. And if you go to the FIPP website and look at the FIPP digital subscription snapshot, which is published every quarter, you can see the data and see the growth over time of these brands, and it is starting to be encouraging. So paid content, digital subscriptions, absolutely crucial first step. Second one is e-commerce. For some businesses, this is as important as digital subs. You generally don't want to build an e-commerce infrastructure, so you rely on some kind of affiliate relationship. It's not perfect, but it works, and it is a natural path to draw readers from your trusted content to getting them to transact with brands and products that you recommend. Just be careful not to abuse that power. You must make sure that the products are justifiable and quality, but it can also be a powerful offering to a paid content or a club strategy. Advertising, which is that's kind of the other area in this digital revenue space, is really a tale of 2 graphs. The first graph shows that this is from PwC's advertising from entertainment report, shows that digital formats are going to dominate growth for the next 5 years. The ones that are at the top: VR, OTT video, internet advertising, esports. The traditional things like TV and newspapers and magazines showing decline. So there's the first thing to hold in your mind. All the growth is coming in digital. Digital is now also the biggest sector in the market, but digital is completely dominated by 3 companies. So this is the share of digital ads in the US. Google, Facebook, and Amazon, and this is a year out of date. This picture has only gotten worse in the last year, own more than 70% of the digital ad market, and their dominance is increasing. So if you rely on digital advertising as a revenue stream, you are competing for 15% of the market, less than 15% of the market, against every other media business in the world, including Disney, the New York Times, Hearst, everybody. We say that you're trying to be a big fish in a small pond that has the Loch Ness Monster living in it. So it's absolutely impossible to dominate in this space in the way that we used to dominate when we were a print business. So advertising, not a very healthy and robust picture in digital advertising, I'm afraid. Ultimately, we're all in the content business. One of the key enablers of this consumer revenue strategy is using these platforms effectively. A whole bunch of new audio and video platforms out there that you can use. And really, I would just encourage you to think of 2 questions. How am I going to get a consumer to transact with me through these new platforms? And how can I create content that is bespoke for that platform? If the answer to either of those questions is no or too difficult, then don't do it. The transaction one is crucial. Many of you will have experimented with Amazon Echo. That's great. What's the monetization model? There isn't one. So why are you doing it? Who's benefiting from it? The consumer? Yes. Amazon's benefiting from it. You're not. it's an Amazon play, it's not a you play. And that we've done time and time again. So you've got to have this discipline of transaction. And if you link that to a D2C strategy, paid content, e-commerce, I'm on a platform, how am I going to get somebody to buy a sub? How am I going to get somebody to buy a product? If you can't, then you probably shouldn't do it. Very quickly, some data on podcasting. Podcasting being one of those new content types, actually one that does have a multi-revenue possibility. It has lots of different revenue streams for it now. I'll leave you to read that at your leisure afterwards. You can also go and look at the podcast report on our website. When it comes to content distribution, though, there is another big problem, which is that the same companies that dominate the digital advertising space dominate the content distribution space. If you look at referrals, so non-organic traffic to websites, they come from Google and Facebook. All these other brands that you hear about, including TikTok, Instagram, and all these other things, are a waste of time. It's still only a Google and a Facebook play. So you are entirely reliant when it comes to traffic coming to your website on the whims of these two companies, other than building your own brand organically. The good news is that there's an enormous amount of legislative work going on, and I'm rushing because I'm running out of time. There's an enormous amount of legislative work going on to affect all of this. You should keep an eye on the impacts of this, because the implications for privacy policies on your business will be considerable. But we do see signs as well that their domination of advertising and content distribution is beginning to end, particularly in the case of Facebook. There's a whole bunch of other revenue that we came to at the bottom of our little framework there, which I won't go into now. You can get this from the Innovation in Media World Report, which you get free as a FIPP member. There's a little plug for joining FIPP. All the different things that you can do outside of those models that we've spoken about earlier to make money. You need to have 3 or 4 or 5 of these. A good indicator of why is that during the coronavirus crisis, we reckon about half of these business models were negatively impacted and half were positively impacted. So you can see that if you had a diverse spread of models, then the chances are you'd have been able to weather the crisis reasonably well. Just finally on M&A and consolidation, lots of deals happening in the market right now. And as I said earlier, that's going to continue, by the way. All the decision making that people are making is going to value. So what's the valuation impact on that decision making process? If you're talking about an ad-driven print business, you're getting 4 to 6 times the profit. If you're talking about a data business, you're talking between 10 and 15 times the profit. So you can see that the impact of what you do flows through into the value that the business ultimately has. And in a market where everything's for sale, that's a really important factor. Look at the yellow bubble on the right-hand side. Future PLC paid 29 times the profit for price comparison site Go Compare, because they believe they can drive that much value out of it. So M&A is everywhere and is a really crucial factor in what we're doing. So more or less on time, a little bit of an overrun. Apologies to colleagues at MagSpecie for being a little bit late. It's easy to be overwhelmed by all the changes that we're facing, but these changes are only going to increase in frequency and impact. This has to be seen as an advantage. I firmly believe there's no better or brighter time to work in this industry, because we've never had more opportunity than we have now. The print industry allowed us to grow for 100 years, but if we seize the opportunities that are there now, we can build businesses that will continue to grow for another 100 years, because we're at the end of the beginning of the digital age now, and the next years are going to be very interesting. Thanks very much for watching. If you want to learn more about us, you can go to fipp.com, sign up to the newsletter, become a member. You can write to me, James at fipp.com. You write to me personally and ask me more about how you can help me. You can follow us on Twitter.
Thank you so much for that, James. That was amazing. Just to start off the Q&A, we have a few questions from our very own Sylvia Skeen. So the first question is, if you are a small magazine publisher, where do you feel you should focus your efforts in the next year?
Yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of the companies in our network are small publishers, and it's very easy to be overwhelmed. And of course, they don't have the financial muscle that the big publishers have to do all these things at once. I think if I was going to do one thing, I wouldn't do one thing, I would do 2 things. The first and most crucial thing is I would put in place a proper data strategy, because if I don't have data, then the rest of this is academic. I can't actually do any of the digital opportunities that I want to do without having a good data strategy. It doesn't need to be massively expensive, but it's a very, very worthwhile and valuable investment. The second one is I would have an honest conversation. So Alina asks, what do I mean by data strategy? Great question. So what I mean by that is, first of all, thinking about what are all the sources of data in my business? How can I learn more about my consumer? The ultimate goal is anybody who ever touches your business, who interacts with your business, you want to capture that interaction and record it somewhere, put it in a database. You want to be able to assign it to a user and say, that person did this with us. There's a whole bunch of off-the-shelf software as a service solutions, something like a HubSpot CRM or something like that, that can do this for not a lot of money. Then the next stage, once you've got the software bit right, is to go through your business and look at that in a very kind of disciplined way and say, what are all these interactions? Let's map all the processes where data is coming into the business and make sure it all goes into that pot. So the pot, and this is a real virtuous circle, because the pot just keeps filling up. Once you start doing it, it just keeps filling up, filling up, filling up. Little tiny example, we started doing this on our website, collecting registration data, not membership, just registration. You want to look at something, register. And it's just been bubbling away for 9 months, 10 months, whatever. We've got 2,000 people who've registered now. So we've got 2,000 people who we can start to build a profile of. And for us, that's a lot. In our industry, it's a lot of people. So you want to start building a profile of the audience. And then you can use that to do all the other stuff that you need to do. So think about digital subscriptions. When you start digital subscriptions, you can then go into your database and say, who are the 100 or the 500 most loyal people that we've got? Who are the ones that interact with us the most? They look at the most pages on the website, they've subscribed to the magazine for longest, whatever it might be, whatever criteria. Those are the people you can then target for your digital subscriptions. And we know, because we've got the data from the news industry to prove it, that those people are much more likely to subscribe digitally than just randomly marketing people that you don't know. So it's a kind of a, A leads to B leads to C. And I can talk you through it in a bit more detail, Alina, if you want to do that offline. The second thing I would do is I would have an honest conversation with myself and my peers in my company about, is my content good enough? Because a lot of the insecurity about this comes from a feeling that your content's not good enough. So you've got to have a real honest conversation and say, is my content good enough to do all this stuff? And the second honest conversation is, what's the real future for my print business? Because the print business probably still throws off 80%, 70% of the revenue and 90% of the profit for most small businesses, right? That's not going to last forever. And you've probably kept it that way by shrinking and shrinking and shrinking in many cases. So that transformation that I was talking about moving from the legacy print product to the luxury product in print, it's absolutely crucial to just get over that and just do it. Because when you do it, suddenly you're freed up from a position of print being a declining business that you have to worry about all the time. That's what I said right at the beginning, right? We've got to stop thinking about how to stop the challenges and start taking the opportunities. The challenge is a print business. So you've just got to solve that challenge so that when you have a board meeting or a management meeting, you're not thinking about it. You're thinking about the opportunities. So those are two things I would do. I think the crucial thing. Asna, I have an audience question. How would you go about expanding? This is from Calvin Gill. Thank you, Calvin. How would you go about expanding through e-commerce and attaining quality affiliates for the first time? It depends what sector you're in, Calvin. I think if you're in a very specialist sector, then you probably know the right person to talk to already, because it will be the biggest website in your community. So if you run a magazine about, I don't know, pets, or let's be more specific, dogs. If you run a magazine about dogs, then there's probably a dog supply website that's the biggest one in your industry. So you just go and talk to them. They will be the first port of call in terms of the affiliate relationship, and then you can put the tech in afterwards. If there's not that, then there are a bunch of intermediaries out there that you can go and talk to. We would recommend a company called Tipser, who are now part of Bolt. They are a tech e-commerce business who can help you to build the right e-commerce solution for your company. And you can just talk to them direct and they'll walk you through the process. So there's a whole bunch of players out there who can help you do this. But if you're a specialist company, start with the biggest player in your specialist market. If you're not, then talk to somebody like Bolt, Tipser, and work with them.
Amazing, thanks. Okay, I have another question from Sylvia.
Sure.
Which countries seem to be more bullish about magazines?
About print magazines? That's a difficult question. I wouldn't say that any of them are particularly bullish about it. It's not a bullish sector, if we're totally brutally honest. Print magazines as a sector are in an enormous amount of transformation at the moment. And we've got to remember, well, it's a very complex answer. I'll try and be brief with it. There is a very interesting sector that's happening in mainly European and North American markets, which is the independent publishing sector. Independent publishing sector is very interesting because there's a lot of new talent, new creativity coming in there, and they are adopting the model that we've spoken about, the luxury model, because they don't, because it just works, and they just don't know any different. And you was going to say any better, they don't know any different. So they're doing that approach, and it's working very well, and there's lots of great ideas. So that's a very interesting sector that is growing, and that's growing very well. Then there is the legacy, if you want to call it that, or the kind of heritage publishers who are in this space, who are divided into two camps, really. I think if you're in the specialist publishing space, you can be reasonably bullish about print if you're a specialist publisher. If you follow some of the steps that we've spoken about, and you focus on subscriptions, and you focus on quality and expertise and specialism, then you can be pretty confident that there's a growth strategy out there for print. It won't be as big as digital, but it will be growth. The problem comes in that that's not the majority of the market. The majority of the print market is still women's lifestyle and entertainment. And honestly, women's lifestyle and entertainment is just going to be substituted by the internet. Not 20%, not 50%, but 90% substituted by the internet. You know, there's a reason why Dotdash have closed the print editions of Entertainment Weekly and InStyle this week. You know, perfect examples of that. Entertainment Weekly, there is a great brand, very well known, very creative, fantastic heritage, but there isn't a thing in there that you couldn't get on the internet, right? And in more than one place. So I think it's just a function. We've said this all along. All these headlines about the state that print is in and the death of print, that dreadful phrase and all that kind of stuff, are driven by the fact that the largest sectors in print are moving to the internet. It's just a fact. But that doesn't mean that the whole of the print industry is moving to the internet. It doesn't mean that there's not pockets of growth. So in aggregate, I said it was a long, complex answer. In aggregate, you cannot be bullish about print as an industry. That would just be stupid. But you can be bullish about some sectors, particularly special interest and luxury.
That's great. Thanks. Okay. Another question from Sylvia. This is about diversity. Can you suggest a great online magazine that has really embraced diversity? Do you have an example of that?
Well, there's a couple of good magazines in the US that do this. There's a couple in the UK as well. In the UK, we have, now I'm struggling to remember the names now. Give me a second and I'll tell you. In the US, there's Sensi, which is a good one. There is also, let me just look this up, 1 second. What's this one called? There's Cultures magazine, CULTURS magazine, which is a very good magazine looking at multicultural issues and different populations. Always with the caveat that I am not the best person to ask about this, and you know, it's a big process. A part of this is recognizing that asking middle-aged white blokes to talk about diversity is absolutely not the right way to do this. So I'm very, very aware of that. All I can say is from my limited experience of it, Cultures mag in the US, Sensi mag in the US. In the UK, there's is it called Hey Girl or Wow Girl or something like that, which is talking about these kind of issues. I would say that I do a lot of work with universities. A lot of the university student projects are focused on issues around diversity, particularly ethnic diversity, looking at multiracial issues. So are you, if you're a mixed race person, there's not really a home for you, a brand for you, for example. So they're looking at things around that. And of course, LGBTQ plus issues, which are, there's already a number of really, really good titles like that around that, Attitude and Gay Times and Diva and those kind of things. But seems to be an immense appetite to have more and more in that space as that group, as that community has more and more opportunities to express itself in society. So yeah, I mean, the best thing I can tell you is come to the Congress, because we'll be doing a lot of content on that with people who are genuinely experts in this and can talk from personal expertise rather than me who's at it easy and is not the best person to ask.
That's great. Thanks. And thanks for acknowledging that. Just to tack on to that, actually, I have a suggestion. Extra magazine out from the East, I think they're based in Montreal, are really good at covering queer issues. So if you're looking at something that's based in Canada, that would be a really great example. Yeah,
we find in certainly every Western market that there is a very thriving, particularly LGBTQ plus scene in media is really thriving, and there's some fantastically creative stuff happening both in print and digitally around that market. And it's one of the areas where there's a lot of talent. It's attracting a lot of talent because a lot of the kids coming into the market for the first time want to work in and look at those issues. It's a really interesting sector.
That's
Some ones from Sylvia there in the chat as well. Room magazine, Loose Lips, Here magazine in BC. Yeah.
Yeah. And coincidentally or not, they're all member magazines of Max BC.
There you go.
All right. On that note, I think it's time for us to bring our Q&A to a close. Thank you so much, James, for that presentation and for answering all our questions. That was just amazing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.